She's an orphan. He's an orphan. She is. He is. She is. They are. He probably is. I'm guessing a little bit here, but I'm pretty sure I remember. Where is everybody's parents? Why is everyone in Frieren an orphan? I'm not exaggerating here either. Well, not literally everyone, but a ridiculous amount of the cast are orphans. Out of the main characters in the first season, there's an absurd ratio. Even for the fantasy genre, there's a lot. It breaks down something like this. Alright, so 4 orphans to everyone who has a parent, which is kind of rough compared to the other demographics. But why? Once we get into the actual characters, there's good reasons for each of them. But taken as a whole, a bizarre number of people Frieren encounters have had their entire families taken out. It has some advantages for the style of storytelling here, but it might be a bit much. So why are they all orphans? Where did everybody go? Let's do a little audit of the orphan rate in Frieren and why its world is like this. So the main titular character, I mean, she's probably worth looking at first, right? Frieren would appear to essentially be an orphan. Probably. In flashbacks, we see a younger Frieren in a settlement which has been absolutely leveled. The village gets destroyed, presumably with Frieren's family. Elves don't have a huge drive to reproduce, they're going extinct slowly, but child Frieren clearly came from somewhere, or someone to be more specific, and those someones, they're no longer here. Afterwards, Flammy takes her in, but as an elf, Frieren's age is a bit more out there. It's not immediately clear how old she is here, we can presume younger, but elves do seem to age quite a bit differently. This particular flashback narratively isn't really here just to let us know she's an orphan. It's more to set up the relationship between Frieren, Flammy, and demons. She was pretty powerful even for an elf, but is now an orphan for the purposes of our little audit here. Why Frieren dramatically has to be an orphan is clearer than the others too. It's Flammy. Frieren has a found family thing going on, like a lot. I mean, it's nice for someone who's so long-lived to keep finding this, I guess. Flammy is one of the examples outside of the hero's party. She adopts Frieren, teaches her manners, suppression, and everything else that comes up. She could have done this as a student, but there's a bit more weight to being raised by a human more directly. It also kind of gives her a link to another elf, which is going to be important down the line. We end up experiencing a lot about Frieren through the contrast between the way humans and elves view time. So Flammy is another example of that, and an extreme one since she raised her. Dramatically, it just makes more sense to make Frieren an orphan. But what about those she's choosing to travel with? Fern is one of the more unique cases we'll cover here. She is also an orphan, yeah, but not from these guys, which is actually rarer. Out of the orphans we know about, a good portion of them have been orphaned by demons. Fern, on the other hand, has a different backstory. Her parents were killed in a war in the Southern Lands, so not because of demons, but arguably because of their impact in the world, the instability they've been causing. It opens things up for war. We actually see a glimpse of her parents too, which is pretty unique. Kind of like Frieren, we have a clear dramatic reason for Fern to be an orphan. It establishes a link or parallel between her and Frieren, or Heta. It allows Fern to be a non-biological family link to the old party. Heta found her and tried to keep her alive. Then Frieren took over, and at some point someone probably taught her that these faces were something she should do. I mean, unless it's just a biological instinct that kicks into not getting a treat, and this is one that kicks in when you get one. Having Fern spend her developing years with Frieren and Heta is interesting for bringing more of a nature versus nurture thing into it, especially since they've both devoted themselves to magic. In a lot of ways, you can kind of see the influence personally. I always think the Fern Stark teaser scenes have more in common with the Himmel Frieren attitudes to romance than not. But yeah, the 2 first members of the modern party are both orphans. Making them all orphans, it gives Frieren and Fern something else in common, plus Stark and most of the cast too. But Fern's backstory is more dependent on her being an orphan. Like Frieren, Fern's whole adoption storyline with Heta trying to get Frieren to take over and look after her, it wouldn't work if these 2 were still alive. So yeah, they have to get fridged. These 2 are orphans too. I don't have a lot to say about this. Even the hero's party were pretty much all orphans. Coming from the age of the Demon King though, it's understandable. These 2 even shared an orphanage. It's understandable that you'd want a lot of the cast in this period to be orphans. Although since we're 28 years since the death of Himmel the hero. And then, not to be blunt, but pretty much everyone's parents are going to be dead one way or another by then. Next is another member of the main party, and yeah, he's also an orphan. His parents are dead. Stark is from a warrior village which got attacked by demons, a common enough backstory in this world, and it provides some depth to Stark overcoming and utilizing fear. Frieren and Stark both being orphans is a parallel between them as well. They were both raised by members of the hero's party. It's important to establish this link, this similarity despite their differences. It does mean that our entire main party is orphans though, something that doesn't come up that much to say is all there. I'm not saying they've been chatting about it all the time, but it feels like very little focus is pulled to this one thing they all have in common. Stark's orphanhood is quite like Frienen's too. It's used properly, there's a reason for it, it's part of his development and it works. Now at this point there's a pretty clear trend, everyone in Frieren is an orphan, but it goes past our main party. Most of the supporting cast is orphan too. So it's not just the main party. Everywhere you turn in this world, you'll probably find an orphanage. The supporting cast is absolutely brimming with them, at least with those we have a clear answer on. Because you see, now we're in this section, we get to more don't knows. Just because not every character hands over their bio the second they get on screen. That would be more convenient for us, but they don't. Even out of the supporting characters though, there's a fair number which it's clear they're orphans, and a surprisingly small number who aren't. We don't need to explain each one here, but it's something like this. All these cool people, definitely orphans. Also, a lot of people we meet on random travels and those taking the mage exams, a lot of them are as well. That's it. 3 people in the whole of Frieren that's safe to talk about with an anime audience, and no major spoilers here, but it doesn't get much better as we go along. Also, Frieren gets a very special award here. It's called the Comfy Little Invisible Parents Award for being the MVP of having a physical appearance of her parents. I don't just have to picture her with a mustache and flat cap, we have an actual photo. I've probably had it on screen a lot since there aren't great b-roll for non-existent characters. Now there is one big group of characters I haven't mentioned yet though. Well, I mean, outside of bringing up how often they're the cause of the orphaning. So yeah, if you have any issue with my methodology, the biggest so far might be demons. But they don't raise their young. As far as we can tell, demons are essentially all orphans in a sense, and none are, because they don't raise each other. They just appear and get on with it. There's no need for parenting, like how giraffes can walk out the womb. I don't think they're really worth including in here, but I suppose whichever way you want to cut it, demons probably heavily skew the data. Push comes to shove, I'd say these are also orphans, but that would get us closer to like 90-ish%, and it feels like cheating. More if we count just the background ones, you know? So, there's like 4 times as many characters who are orphans than those with parents. Why? For some there's a specific personal reason, but mostly it comes down to 2 things about Frieren's setting. The first is that this is a terrible world. Despite being a chiller, comfier kind of Ceres in a lot of places, it's set in the aftermath of a very harsh reign of a demon king and new wars. This is probably the biggest in-universe reason, and it does partially explain our orphan rate, really. Frieren's time zone setting is always defined as its distance from the death of him or the hero, but it's very much in the aftermath of a catastrophe. A lot of those orphaned in Frieren to date have got that way because of demons raiding villages. The world wasn't a particularly nice place to live. Even beyond the demons, we have cases like Frieren, who has been orphaned from the wars and everything that came along with such instability from the Demon King. Essentially, a lot of people in Frieren are orphans because it's important to demonstrate how different the current era is, how big the hero's party's accomplishment was. We see this quite a bit in how we learn about the earlier world. Flashbacks to a time when everything was a bit rougher, when a village getting wiped out wasn't that uncommon. Orphans as a whole are to be expected, not to get too grim, but on a nicer note, there might be another in-universe reason for there being so many orphans that we meet. Essentially, since we're following those who are choosing adventure, it means we're self-selecting a specific subsection of people. Sign is a case to look at here. He wants to go adventuring, but initially won't let himself. Gets out there eventually though, but Sign shows not everyone is going to be drawn to this kind of life. We mainly meet those who have decided to leave and go adventuring, which is a lot easier if you have nothing to go back to. Since we're seeing adventurers, we see more of the orphans. Plus, orphans allow us a tidier way to build bonds between the characters. A lot of the core party are orphans, but they have adoptive parents or parental figures still. People who don't have biological children, but it helps the story to give them this close bond between each other, like Flamme and Frieren, or Frieren and Hita and Fern. Having that semi-parental link between the two, it establishes a closeness of meaning. But it does mean that we end up with like half the cast being orphans. It's just how it adds up. The same for the heroes party and our current one. Having them all pretty much be orphans can communicate more about the world, and it removes the lingering question of why they've never returning from their wandering to visit home. It makes more sense to write characters without parents in these settings, because it removes the idea idea of a family that's grounding them. It also helps draw parallels between Fern, Frieren, and others. Being withdrawn emotionally, orphans taken in by powerful mages and then trained. If everyone's an orphan, everyone kind of has this in common. It's a pretty common trope in fantasy stuff, and frankly in a lot of genres. Frieren absolutely takes it to another level though. Aside from series that are specifically about orphans, like an orphanage or something, I don't think I've ever seen this kind of ratio. There's opportunities for storytelling there though. You couldn't do Stark's backstory without making him an orphan. The backstories of Zuri, Frieren, and Flammy would be much more different if everyone wasn't an orphan. The bonding between the characters, the parallels, them being orphaned opens up opportunities for storytelling, but also for more quiet world building, for showing you something about the world rather than telling. It adds to the series. The orphan trope might be an overused one in Frieren, but it isn't to the detriment of the drama or the world. Having a land half full of orphans doesn't take away from the characters. Even all those who died from demon village raids don't get that repetitive, at least not to me. I think them being orphaned feels more like it's self-selected, like those who have nothing to lose are more likely to leave and go on these big adventures. I'm sure there's more people in the world of Frieren like her, but we don't focus on them as much because they're not as interesting. It might be an overused trope here, but personally I don't really mind. I'm not sure what visiting Old Man Stark every once in a while would really add to our little journey. Well, nearly everyone having this one thing in common, it does add something. Hey, thanks for sitting through to this end screen. Subscribe if you'd like to see some more. Cheers.